Hey folks, Paul Abernathy here from Electrical Code Academy. I've been getting a lot of requests from individuals asking me what happens when electrical equipment is exposed to a flood condition, much like what we're seeing with Hurricane Helene down in Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, those areas. So we wanted to do a quick video and explain the NEMA evaluating water damage document. Now, I've been privileged enough to work with NEMA. I was an employee of NEMA. I was the southern representative for NEMA for a couple years, and that meant that I was intimate with storms and how we react to storms and the support that NEMA and the manufacturers can give. But I was also privy to things with insurances and FEMA and how people interacted with insurance claims. And again, when you're in a disaster like this, all kinds of things can go on and you're ready to get back into your home or you're ready to rebuild. And when it comes that time to rebuild, there are certain things that you need to be careful of. And that is making sure that you get everything you deserve, that you get all the supplies that you need, that the inspectors and the insurance companies don't try to shortcut your benefits that you deserve as American citizens. And obviously, any of the FEMA resources that are available that you can get. And there will be situations where you may get into an argument with an adjuster or with FEMA or with the insurance. Before we get into the NEMA evaluating water damaged equipment document, I want to tell you that do not let them bully you around. If you find that you're being rushed into something and you're being told to accept something because insurance won't give you a claim for something, take a step back. And I understand you want to get back into your home. You're anxious to get your life back together. Do not let them take advantage of you, okay? You can always reach out to me. We are experts in electrical equipment. We will give you good, solid information that you can use against your insurance company or with your insurance company, adjusters, inspectors, manufacturers. So don't be afraid to reach out. We want to make ourselves available to you here at Electrical Code Academy to answer all those questions that you may have. We're here to help. And so this was a reason why I've been asked to do a quick overview of the NEMA's Evaluating Water Damage document, because it is a very powerful document, because it gives a consensus from the NEMA members, which are made up of over 450 manufacturers. Now, that does not mean that any one specific manufacturer may be able to give additional or differing guidance than what this guide gives you. That's where you're going to hear me talk about always reach out to the manufacturer and ask for their assistance on a piece of equipment before you energize it or put it back in use. Or if somebody tells you you can recondition it or repurpose it, if it doesn't smell right, doesn't pass that test, reach out to the manufacturer for guidance. Contact us. We'll give you guidance as well. Okay. All right. So let's go look real quick at this NEMA document. So the first thing you'll see is the use of this publication. So this is the NEMA document. Okay. Just kind of give you an idea. You can find this on the internet. All you got to do is search for NEMA Evaluating Water Damaged Electrical Equipment. If it's on NEMA, then you just set up a free account and then you can download a free digital copy. I'm sure that that will only take you a few moments to do that, but plenty of these copies are available on the internet. I think the latest edition is 2019. So while it does get periodic review, it hasn't had any changes to it since 2019. All right, the very first thing, it's very important when you're utilizing this guide, and this guide is going to be very powerful if you're going against an auditor, an adjuster for an insurance company, dealing with FEMA people. Sometimes people are in a quick hurry to get things back to normal and they tell you, oh, that's okay. You can reuse that wire or you can reuse that switch. Oh, those circuit breakers will be fine once they dry out. Do not always listen to what those individuals say because it's in their best interest to move on. Okay? They're willing to roll the dice on you. Well, manufacturers are not, and I am not. And most people that care are not willing to roll the dice on your safety. So extremely important that whatever they tell you, make sure that you really understand it. The first thing that's in this document right here, it says, this publication serves as a guide that represents a consensus of the NEMA member companies and is not intended to override the recommendations of the specific equipment manufacturer. It's not going to override whatever. So give me an example. You might have a situation with a piece of equipment and the guide says that it is to be replaced. However, you question the exposure, the condition of use, how it was exposed, where you're at, the amount of time it was exposed. You can reach out to the manufacturer, and a manufacturer may give you differing guidance on their equipment than what would be in this guide. And you want to follow what the manufacturer specifically says. Now, a manufacturer like Siemens is not going to give recommendations on Schneider's equipment, or Eaton's not going to give a recommendation on GE or somebody else's equipment. Okay, I mean, just giving you examples. Southwire is not going to give recommendations on Encore wire, or Prismium's not going to give recommendations on Nexan. You get what I'm saying? You need to reach out to the manufacturer of the specific piece of equipment that is in question, okay? Now, this guide is designed to explain how you deal with an exposure from things like flooding, firefighting activities where they just deluge everything with water in effort to put out the fire, hurricane activities, and other events which can bring in large bodies of water that flood the area. And it's going to impact suppliers, manufacturers, consumers, all of this stuff. We all work together. And that's what this guide was kind of came up with. Okay. Now, as far as evaluation, all evaluation should be done by qualified personnel, somebody that understands it. Do not have somebody evaluate something that is not their area of expertise. Don't have a wiring cable manufacturer evaluating anything to do with circuit breakers, okay? And that goes the same with your inspections and goes the same with anybody that offers to do an evaluation. You're gonna have a lot of people come in and they'll say, well, we'll go through and we'll check things. If a certain piece of equipment is not in their wheelhouse, how in the world can they give you a good recommendation whether something needs to be replaced or whether it needs to be reconditioned or it even can be reconditioned? I'm just saying, okay? So be careful of that, okay? Because that's the kind of stuff that you can get involved in, okay? Distributor of electrical equipment should not supply any inventory that has been subject to water damage, okay? This is so important. Now, this all started back when Katrina hit down in Louisiana, and a lot of the products started making their way out of Louisiana and being resold into other markets like in Texas. And this was discovered by an electrical inspector out in Texas who brought the attention to me. And back early on, I got this to NEMA, and this which started a really big debate on what could be reconditioned and what could not be reconditioned, okay? So that's back over 10 years ago when I was with NEMA. We kind of started this process. And it's evolved, okay, to this latest edition in 2019. Now, so important. Again, when you have a flood, you don't know what's in the water. You don't know what contaminants are in there. You don't know what's come out of the ground leached into that water. You have no idea. The chemicals, there's sewage, there's oils, there's gases, there's debris, there's contaminants that can play havoc on a lot of this equipment, whether it's mechanical function, things like that. It can play havoc on it. So you have to be careful about how this stuff is evaluated. Okay, now, how do you evaluate? Well, obviously somebody's got to be qualified to do it. It's not you walking around and looking at it. You want to make sure somebody that is qualified to come in and do the evaluation. That's why you have to lean on the manufacturers. They're really qualified to know about receptacles and switches and wire and cable and switch gear, panel boards, enclosures, boxes, fittings, raceways. They know their market. And so one of your jobs is when you're rebuilding. Now, if you're building all back new, then all your equipment's going to be new and everything, not a concern. But if you're going into a home and you're trying to have an insurance adjuster come in and they start saying, well, you can reuse those receptacles if they dry out, or you can reuse that NM cable if it's submerged, or you can. Step back. Really, step back. These people are trying to rush you along too quickly. Okay? It really needs to be evaluated. This is your family. This is your life. Okay? You are blessed enough, if you were to make it through the storm. The last thing you want to do is put your family at risk and you or your property at risk because somebody rushed you through the acceptance process and said, it'll be okay. No. Make your adjusters work. Make your insurance company work. If they deny some claim and say, we're not replacing something, reach out to an expert. I have done plenty of letters. I have done plenty of consultant work for people who are running into those issues with their insurance companies. I am more than happy to help. I have plenty of credentials to go to bat. Been an expert witness. I do not mind fighting that fight. And I'm sure there's plenty of lawyers that will take on that battle as well, because you're the consumer being harmed by somebody's trying to expedite something without thinking about safety. Okay? So there's many visual observations that can be done. There's operational tests. There's performance tests, manual tests. They'll look for things like oxidation buildup, residue buildup, rust, which can come very quickly in equipment that's not rated for it, for exposure. There can be discoloration. You can have knife switches that show that sticking that you can tell by manually work that doesn't work right. All those type of things. It's really a collection of not only observations, operational, but performance testing that gets done. So it's not something that you walk through. It's not something that even a normal electrician can do, right? They don't have any idea about what the exposure is. So again, very important, and reach out to people that know what they're doing in this type of scenario. And I'm here to help, okay? So keep that in mind. There will also be occasions where there'll be infrared thermographic imaging in order to see heat buildup on equipment that's imminent failure, things like that, okay? So important things to keep in mind, all right? Also, again, reaching out to the manufacturers. They may have some in-house or performance test standards that you can utilize for comparison. But at the end of the day, in this guide, there's going to be some things that basically you flat out you do not recondition, you just replace. But please reach out to the manufacturer. I'm going to give you two examples here. You ready? I'm going to just give you two examples, and then we'll talk about it in a minute. So you have receptacles that are flooded. You reach out to Legrand or Leviton or whatever, and you ask them, hey, these receptacles have been submerged. Can they be reconditioned? They say no. Well, the NEMA guy says no. But if Leviton says, or Legrand or Pass and Seymour, if they say yes, they can if you follow these steps. Well, you got to be careful because that manufacturer, they're telling you it can. They're going to ask you a bunch of questions, but they have just raised their liability when they do fail. But as you saw, the manufacturers can give specific instructions that are different than what's in this consensus guide, okay? Now, that's not to mean that you're forced to do that. For receptacles, for example, you're going to see that that's a total replacement if they're submerged, right? Or they're exposed to this flooding. You can use this guide as far as dealing with adjusters or insurance and say, look, the guide says replace it, that type of thing. But there are some things that are quite costly that you may interact. Motor control centers, for example, you may interact with the manufacturer on that because those are costly pieces of equipment and they could possibly be reconditioned. Okay. All right. It's kind of things I want to talk about. I think today everybody wants everything to be perfectly nifty, no questions asked, no room for interpretation. Why isn't it just black and white? This got to replace this guy. You got to go to the manufacturer because their test standards, they test under different conditions of use. And there may be a situation where something can be reconditioned. You might have a consensus where all the manufacturers say, no, throw it out. But there might have been that one manufacturer that was like, no, ours is evaluated for that. It can be reconditioned. Well, it just may happen you reach out to that one manufacturer and they're like, yes, and here's our instructions for how to do it. If they're willing to take on that liability, that responsibility, then hey, far be it for me to say otherwise. Okay? But this is a consensus document. Now, again, it goes without saying, contact the manufacturer. I don't care if you do a list and you're going through the list and you say, okay, I'm going to call the box manufacturer, I'm going to call the device manufacturer, the wire and cable manufacturer, the panel board manufacturer, the enclosure manufacturer. A lot of times it'll be the same people that do the panel board, that do the enclosure, maybe Eaton, Cutler Hammer, might be Schneider, Square D. You get me. You go through the list, get your questions, do your due diligence reaching out to these individuals, okay? Also, I'll show you in a minute, you can contact NEMA and ask them for assistance. They will put you in contact with the right people with the manufacturer that are members of NEMA, okay? And if they don't do that, you let me know, okay? Because I would love to blast that on a future video or podcast where you didn't get the assistance you need. I've worked for NEMA. They'll be there to help you, okay? So reach out to the manufacturer. They're going to ask you a lot of questions. They're going to want to know what was the exposure, how long was it exposed, what type of flooding, was it incidental like with a sprinkler, or was it due to flooding from a hurricane where there's groundwater and contaminants, oils, gas, chemicals. They're going to know how long it was exposed. They want to know was it saturated or not. What was the nature of the device's function? How did you use it? Where is it being used? So many questions. The length of time that it was exposed before the incident was, where you noticed it. When did he first notice it? When did the issue happen? When did the flooding start? How long did you wait before you contacted us? Was it sitting there exposed? All those questions, you've got to be ready to bring them. Okay, don't expect to get answers from a manufacturer because unless you can bring these things, because all manufacturers are going to ask these types of questions. Now, if they give you guidance on certain equipment that can be reconditioned in their opinion, even if it's adverse to this guide, make sure they share that with you in an email. Get it in written form. Don't take it over the phone. Say, can you please email me step by step what I need to do in order to recondition something if they tell you it can. If they turn to you and say, well, we can't put that in writing, no, replace. I'm just saying, it's not worth it. Make sure you get that. And if they say, no, we can't, make sure you know their name, try to get their name. And then when you're dealing with an adjuster or insurance, make it clear that, look, I reached out. They would not put in writing anything about whether or not it could be reconditioned or not, especially if the guide says that it can't be reconditioned, it must be replaced. That is just some additional support if you're fighting a claim, okay? That type of thing. Just some little tips, that's all. All right, so always contact the original manufacturer of the equipment, although you can reach out to people like me and others for assistance and guidance and direction. But you definitely ultimately want to get you in contact with the manufacturer, okay? Now, some equipment, as you'll see, flat out can be, as far as a consensus goes, can be reconditioned. However, again, if we have consensus and there's 10 manufacturers, you may have one or two that say, well, I disagree. It should be replaced, and we're not going to be held accountable or anything like that for it. You might get that when you call them. You might happen to stroll upon that one manufacturer that wasn't in the consensus, and they're going to give you directions. That's why it was right up at the beginning. Contact the manufacturer. Do not be shy, folks. Okay. Also, the National Electrical Code is getting better and better on what can be reconditioned as far as the NEC is concerned and what cannot, to kind of help alleviate some of this stress over a guide like this. Because when it says that circuit breakers, when it says that AFCIs, GFCIs, surge protectors cannot be reconditioned, even though the guide says it's got to be reconditioned, you heard me say reach out to the manufacturer. Look, if you have a manufacturer at that point that says, oh yeah, you can recondition our AFCI, not according to the NEC, which is a minimum safety standard. Okay, and remember, the NEC is a minimum safety standard. If it tells you not, and you think, well, the manufacturer says it's okay, but the NEC says it's not okay, all right? You say, well, I'll just follow the manufacturer. Folks, listen, no. If the NEC is more restrictive than the manufacturer, you follow the NEC. If the manufacturer is more restrictive than the NEC, you follow the manufacturer. okay? Important things that you need to learn, right? Okay, so you've contacted the manufacturer. Also throughout the NEC, you're going to see a lot of information on what can and cannot be reconditioned. This is the information to contact NEMA. Here's the numbers right here. Here's an email address to Megan Hayes, okay? This is the fax number right there. Again, you're affected by a flood, a firefighting incident, and it sprays all your equipment. You're in a hurricane situation, all the stuff, it blows the roof off, everything gets saturated. And you call NEMA. NEMA will put their field representatives in contact with you, and they will help connect you with the various manufacturers. They're going to ask you, do you have this guide? You say yes, and they might even, the NEMA reps may walk you through this guide and then give you guidance on where to go, okay? The next thing would be always staying in open communication with your authority having jurisdiction, okay? Find out what the procedure. They may have an expedited procedure in the event of a disaster, but make sure they're not just brushing you along. Make sure they're just saying, oh, this will be okay, that'll be okay. They are not the experts when it comes to the electrical equipment, okay? They're there to evaluate. So I'm hoping, and I'm calling out all election, wow, we're in election season, so I'm thinking election. I'm calling out all the inspections, authority having jurisdictions, evaluating bodies. Everybody needs to look at it and say, look, we can have an expedited process, but we're not going to rush the process of doing thorough inspections. Inspectors need to make sure that when they're looking at something and they're trying to use something that they consider a recondition, that they get some kind of documentation from the manufacturer saying something is okay. They see non-metallic sheet cable in a building and they know the flood water's got to 10 feet and they know that that building would have been totally 100% saturated and somebody's using NM cable that's still there, then it's not outside of the bounds for a inspector to say, give me something from the manufacturer that says it's okay to do this, that type of thing. It's totally not outside of the bounds for them to do that, okay? So work with your AHJs, authority having jurisdictions, usually your building official. In some areas, it may be your fire chief, fire marshal, depending on your structure of your jurisdiction, all that type of thing. It might be the electrical inspector is acting on behalf of the building official, so that is your AHJ, okay? All the type, work with them to make sure that, you know, everything's working together and that you have all the documentation and follow all local rules, licensing, permitting, all that type of stuff. Make sure you're following all those procedures. Don't just start rebuilding and reusing equipment. You need to reach out to the authority having jurisdiction for guidance here. Electrical equipment, replacement and reconditioning. There are certain things that you may recondition and there's certain things that you have to replace, okay? And you'll see references like may be reconditioned. That's not a shall be. That is a, okay, well, it may be reconditioned. Need to contact the manufacturer. They're going to give you some guidance on that. They're going to tell you yes or no. And they're going to give you specific guidance, that type of thing, right? And then there's certain things in this guide that you can look at it as a consensus and say, well, look, they say replace it. Let's just replace it. That type of scenario. Also, there is a NEMA policy on reconditioned electrical equipment. I encourage you to download it. If you get this document, you see that it is clickable right here. You can't see my little mouse, but right here, this is actually clickable. Okay, so you could click it and it'll give you that policy on reconditioned equipment. A good news, the National Electrical Code, again, is starting to put a lot of things in the code about recondition and what can and can't be. All right, so you're going to get this guide. Now, again, this guide is a starting point. But from an adjuster's point of view, from insurance, from FEMA, this for you as a consumer is your starting point. Okay, now, whether you go contact some manufacturer to get more details or not, okay, when it comes to replacing the equipment, you could stop right here and say, I don't need to contact the manufacturer. If it falls into the category of replace equipment, this is a consensus from the manufacturers that are part of NEMA. You could stop there, Okay. Now, why would you reach out to a manufacturer even if it was something that says that you must replace it? Well, because monetarily, you may have something that you might go, and I'll give you a great example. Non-metallic sheath cable. Non-metallic sheath cable, as far as this guide's concerned, is rated for and it is rated for a dry location only application. Okay. So if it's flooded, hurricane, sprinkler event that's saturated and it gets submerged, okay. I mean, again, we're going to talk a minute about what saturated means and versus incidental contact. But if it gets contact with water, this guide is going to say just flat out replace it because it's a dry only product. However, most people know that the manufacturers of non-metallic sheath cable, which under UL 719, do a water test. So incidental contact with the sheathing, not the conductors inside, not the paper, but the sheathing is not a concern to most manufacturers. So the consensus on replacing NM was because, in this case, the majority of the manufacturers were like, no, we're not going to risk it, just replace it. However, in that rare occasion, you may contact the manufacturer and say, okay, it wasn't a hurricane, it wasn't a flood, it wasn't a flood from creek water or groundwater, contaminated water. I was filling up a bathtub, it overflew, water went through the floor, and this was a second floor apartment. And on this first floor apartment, what happened is water got on the wiring, some of the NM cable that's in the ceiling. Okay, fair enough? You contact us, we're going to say to you, what was the contact? How long? Was it submerged? No, it wasn't submerged. Okay, did you just run over it? Gravity carried it over it? Yes. Okay, next question. Was there insulating material in the ceiling? No, it wasn't insulated. Okay. Yes, it was insulated. Okay, so that meant that the NM cable sat in the thermal insulation that was saturated, so it sat there for a long period of time. How long did it sit there? I don't know, a couple of weeks. Okay, we're going to say replace it. If it incidentally just went over the sheathing and didn't submerge it, it just kind of just incidental with it, just kind of like taking it and just, I know this is graphic, and just sprinkling water on it where gravity knocks it off, then I'm not going to tell you to replace that. This guide would say you replace it. If you contact the manufacturer, they're going to want to know what condition it was exposed to. Now, if you get water in the end of any NM cable, replace it. If NM cable is submerged or saturated or enveloped in water, it's got to be replaced. But incidental contact on it, gravity-fed contact, things like that on the sheathing, we're not going to say replace it all. Now, if you have boxes in the ceiling, it was flooded and those boxes were flooded and water got into the ends of the cable, then we're going to say replace it. Okay? So it's not, this guide is not a one size fit all, but you're going to see that with NM cable, it just flat out says replace it. Okay? So that might be an example where you want to reach out to a manufacturer. But there's other areas where you look at it and go, okay, it's not so incidental. It enveloped the product. It engulfed the product. It was submerged over the product. Flat replace it. Don't even need to reach out to a manufacturer if it says replace. Okay? So that's what's different when I gave you the example of NM cable or Romax that people refer to. There's a difference. And every difference has to do with its condition of exposure. Okay? So that was a real graphic example, but I wanted to be able to explain that to you before we even get in the list so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. All right, so molded case circuit breaker, that's just the same circuit breakers that are in your panel. It's probably in your garage, your basement, or whatever now, is a replacement. Too many working parts in there. They're not sealed. Water gets in there. Too many things that are volatile to work there and rely on that we don't want to risk it. So replace it. Low voltage fuses, too much paper involved in that and all that. Just replace it. Switches of any type, replace it. Busways, if they're Mylar wrapped, replace it. If it's a bus bar with powder coating, evaluate it. If there's no damage to it, basically that powder coating is pretty damn tough, okay? And so what does it say? Contact the manufacturer, and they may give you guidance. But you know what? They may say, no, sorry, rip it out. Be aware of that. Panel boards, that's typically the guts inside your panel. Well, it may be reconditioned. Where you replace all the breakers, may replace the main breaker, but the guts itself may be something that can be cleaned. And the manufacturer is going to give you that guidance, what you can and can't use, what may be not the right cleaner to use. They can cause further damage, corrosion, deterioration. But again, these are just guides to reach out. Switchboards, replace. Motor control equipment. Notice adjustable speed drive, too much electronic components in there. Okay, semiconductors, transistors, electrically controlled and solid state contacts and starters, replace, replace, replace. Overload relays, too volatile to their performance, replace it. Now, manual or magnetic controllers, contact the manufacturer. It may be a chance. If you're in an industrial application and you have a couple of those and they're manual or magnetic controllers, then go on and reach out to the manufacturer and see what they say. One manufacturer may say, no, sorry, place it. The other might say, well, here's some steps. And if they give you steps, make them send it to you in an email so that you have a step-by-step process by a qualified person to be able to go through these steps to the satisfaction of the manufacturer. Okay. Other than that, don't risk it. Okay. Motor control center. Again, may be reconditioned. Reach out. Now, there'll be maybe some components in there, switching and stuff that are not, but the overall motor control center itself, you may get guidance. These tend to be very expensive. You may get guidance from the specific manufacturer of that equipment, step by step, what you can do to bring that equipment back into use. Electrical connectors, splices, all this time, replace. Electronic trip units of low voltage power circuit breakers, replace. Now, here's two occasions where you may be able to recondition is a high voltage circuit breaker as used like in medium voltage and low voltage power circuit breakers, not molded case, but power. Okay, reach out to the manufacturer and tell them the situation, explain to them. They're probably going to be more than aware of the situation that may be from a natural disaster, and they should be able to give you guidance on that, okay? Now, you've got what's called electromechanical protective relays, and you have what's called electronic protective relays. Electronic protective relays, again, gets exposed to this condition, replace. Electromechanical protective relays, and the others listed here, may be able to be reconditioned. Reach out to the manufacturer. Low voltage switchgear, reach out to the manufacturer. Medium voltage switchgear, reach out to the manufacturer. Medium voltage fuses in general, just replace. No sense in trying to keep that. We'll make this one easy. Transformers, okay? The dielectric medium between the primary to secondary, the oil fill, the dry, the cast resin, all of those, if they are exposed, replace. Now, one of these cast resin or oil filled transformers, you could reach out to a manufacturer because maybe they aren't in the consensus. These can be very expensive, by the way. Reach out to them and ask them for any additional guidance. They might right off the bat say, no, we were part of that consensus, just replace it. Most of the dry type transformers, they're going to say, just replace it. Okay? Because of the nature of the paper, the separator, how it is, the resins, the exposure, you don't know what's in the water, the chemicals, that type of thing. Remember, anything in here that said maybe reconditions is on the premise that it's not contaminated water. So any of those that even say may be reconditioned, if it is flood from a hurricane, groundwater, oils, resins, or any question of any of that, no, it may not be reconditioned. Okay, and that's the stance that the manufacturers should have on any of that. But it may be flooding from a sprinkler system that is not contaminated water, to the best that they learn, and they'll ask you a bunch of questions. They may be able to give you guidance, and those would be the ones that more fall into that category of maybe reconditioned where applicable in this guide. Okay, conduit, tubings, we should say raceways, outlet boxes, and junction boxes. Fittings, replace. Outlet and junction boxes, replace. Conduit and tubing, maybe reconditioned. Might have to clean them out. Depends on what kind of exposure, but the manufacturers will give you guidance on that, okay? But you're going to have to replace the fittings. If it's EMT, for example, you're going to have to replace the fittings. You're going to have to replace the boxes. So Next, wire, cable, and flexible cords. Now, here's where it's important to understand where reaching out to me, even though it doesn't say maybe recondition, this is where I gave you an example earlier, because I know that this guide, even though it's a consensus, some of the wiring cable manufacturers don't necessarily, might be in the minority on what they agree here. But again, it's all going to be based on exposure, okay, and what the conditions. So right out the bat, if you were to call me as a wiring cable guy and you don't know the level of exposure, you don't know how much it was exposed to, you have no details, then I'm going to say non-metallic sheet cable, replace it. You have no details to give me. This guide says replace it, replace it. However, if you contact me and we used my example earlier, where it's from a second floor leaked water down onto the first floor, and it was just incidental, vertical. It just went over it, like rained over it. Then I'm going to say it's going to be okay as long as it didn't get into the ends. Now, how can I give you this guidance? Okay. Because as a manufacturer, I can tell you for years, when people put non-metallic sheet cable in a building under construction, which is to be a dry location, you will see under dry location, it has allowances for temporary conditions where they're exposed to wetness and dampness temporarily. And many of us manufacturers have written documents saying, look, if it gets some rain, if it gets some moisture on the cable sheathing, it's perfectly fine. As long as it doesn't get into the end, then you don't have to replace it. Make sense? That's because if we were to follow this guide totally, then it would be any moisture that got onto it, replace. That's why this guide is excellent if you want to use it and say, hey, my NM cable was exposed to these conditions that are in this document. Adjuster, I want it all replaced. You don't have to reach out to the manufacturer, use this NEMA guide. Now, they might ask you to, and then you get somebody like us, a wire and cable manufacturer, and then we might go into detail. We might say, okay, what happened? What's the condition? What's the exposure? When did it happen? How long was it? All those type of things. And then we're going to give you our ruling based on that. But my example is a building that is closed in, that may get rain that comes in and gets on some of the NM sheathing, doesn't mean it all has to be ripped out. It's still a dry location, but it was subject to temporary conditions of dampness and wetness. For example, a house under construction. Okay? So if I have a little bit of water that rains down or comes down from the second floor through the first floor, and it just kind of gets on some of the wiring and it doesn't get into the ends of it, it doesn't submerge it, it doesn't saturate it, it's not held inside of insulation that is totally saturated. It just was there and some water went over it. It's not going to hurt anything because we test non-metallic sheet cable. So that's why I'm telling you, this is just a guide. In fact, in both of these columns, you would not be wrong to always reach out to the manufacturer just to make sure. But this is a good starting point. And if I don't know any details, I'm going to tell you, no, you just need to replace it. Okay. Now, what about wire or cable that is suitable for a wet location, right? Well, we're talking about UF cable. Well, as long as it doesn't get into the ends of the cable, then that UF cable is okay because after all, we put it out in the ground anyway, right? Or what about wire that is rated for a wet location? That wire may be okay as well, depending on the exposure, right? But that's why it says, you know what? Contact the manufacturer. Because what I'm going to ask you is this. I'm going to say, so what was its exposure? Now remember, raceways underground that have like XHHW-2 in it or THHN/THWN-2, they're put in raceways underground. Moisture gets into those raceways. They usually have some additional like oil and gas protection on them, all these type of other things that go through their evaluation under UL 83 for THHN. And THWN-2 or UL44 for XHHW-2. So it already has some evaluation. So it is okay for a wet location. So as you saw, you might have to replace the boxes. You have to replace the fittings. You can maybe take the raceways and re-clean them, but then you got to get the wire out of it. And you got to make sure you don't damage the wire. But even if it is wet location rated wire, then you still want to contact the manufacturer because we'll have questions. What was it exposed to? What was the condition? Where was it? All this kind of stuff. You're deconstructing everything. How do we know something wasn't damaged? All those type of things, okay? Again, these are just guides, okay? But it's somewhere. It gives you something to start with. AFCIs, GFCIs, surge protected device, and wiring devices like switches, receptacles, dimmers, flat out, just replace. Now, you want to call the manufacturer. Maybe they're not in the consensus, and the manufacturer says, "Oh yeah, you can let that receptacle dry out and reuse it." Not what I would do. I would stop right here at the guide and fight my fight with the adjuster. But if you did call, remember, get that in writing from the manufacturer. If I tell you, let me make this real clear. If I tell you that your non-metallic sheet cable is okay from water coming from a second floor through it on first floor, and you've answered all my questions, trust me, I will put it in writing. I don't have no problem with that, okay? When somebody does not want to put something in writing and they tell you it's okay, it usually means they have something to hide. Don't trust that. I'm just saying, okay? All right, so all of those, right, obviously these have electronics and very significant components that save things like your house, your life, whatever. No, it's just replace it. Batteries, obviously no brainer. Cable tray. Well, a cable tray is made up of metal cable tray, fiberglass cable tray, aluminum cable trays. May be able to be reconditioned. Contact the manufacturer. If there's any damaged component, replace it. Any labels that are missing, relabel it. They may give you some guidance on that. That's why it's important. Don't just, they say you can do it. Fire pump controllers, no. Too volatile componentry in that to risk it. So no. Lighting equipment, okay, no. Motors, maybe, depending on the motor. Contact the manufacturer of that motor. Power resistors and related assemblies, no, replace it. Signal protection and communications systems, just replace it. UPS systems, just replace it, okay? So again, this is a starting point. I want to emphasize more than anything, reach out to the manufacturer, start gathering your list. If you're in an incident, go through, and when it's time to redo things and you're working with your adjusters or the insurance, start making a list of the equipment, look for the labels, try to find the manufacturers, do your best to do that, and then reach out to the manufacturers and start documenting, keeping all this documentation for your insurance claims, okay? And then down here, there's just some really good information, right? Additional information that elaborates on a lot of the little things. And I'll just show you the wire and cable because we talked about it. Here's the wire and cable, 4.6, right? And it talks about where water can have a detrimental effect on any of the metallic components, whether it's the conductor, whether it's on an armor or a sheathing, all those type of things. Contamination, if the water gets into the ends and gets on the terminals, again, you can have terminal failure. Medium voltage, if medium voltage gets exposed and chemicals start to deteriorate the dielectric material, you have treeing effect that takes place, major breakdowns. Everything needs to be evaluated. Do not let them tell you to just, let something dry out and then re-energize it. Do not do that, okay? Question whoever says that to you, okay? All right. So anyway, there you've got a lot more information. I just want to tell you, this is the NEMA document, and it's really a great document. At least it gives you a starting point. It's available on NEMA. Go searching online, NEMA, evaluating water damaged electrical equipment. Feel free to reach out to your NEMA field reps. You can go to NEMA.org. You'll see all the field reps there. They're more than happy. Mike Stone, Jack Lyons, Brian Holland, okay? All of these reps will be able to help you. Jody Wages is coming on board. So any of them will be able to help you and find the information and get in touch with the manufacturers that you need to get in touch with. But again, don't let anybody take advantage of you. Don't let them rush you through. I know you want to get back into your home. I know you want this disaster to go away. But we don't want you to survive all of this, rebuild, get your life back together, and have something happen due to electrical equipment down the road that creates a hazard. Just don't want it to happen to you. It's not just about the money. Manufacturers are not just trying to do this. They didn't ask for the disaster, neither did you. And we're all in business. So everybody's going to make money. It just is what it is. That's why you hopefully have insurance. That's why they should come through. That's hopefully why we have FEMA. Let's hope that we take care of our people. Okay. All right, folks. God bless. Hope this has helped you out in any way. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.